The alarm in the university's xenobiology lab shrieked to life as green fluid splashed across Ryan Reed's protective face shield. The alien substance dripped down the clear plastic, obscuring his vision momentarily as he stumbled back from the examination table where the small Vexillian specimen had just violently expelled fluid from its respiratory vents. "Everyone out!" shouted Professor Zeth, his forearms frantically waving toward the exit while his bioluminescent skin flashed warning patterns of red and orange. Potential biohazard protocol. Move. The 20 alien students from 7 different species scrambled toward the exit, some using tentacles, others using multiple legs, and a few hovering above the ground as they fled. Only Ryan remained, steadying himself against a lab bench as he watched the small, turtle-sized Vexillian on the table begin to shudder. "Reed, that includes you," Professor Zeth called, one hand on the emergency containment field activator. Ryan pulled off his splashed face shield, dropping it into a decontamination bin. "Professor, this is Krell's first time off-world. He's terrified. I can't just leave him." The professor's inner eyelids fluttered rapidly in what Ryan had learned was the Zentari equivalent of exasperation. "The decontamination protocols will take at least 4 minutes to fully engage," Ryan finished. "He'll be alone and scared. Just let me stay until the full lockdown." Without waiting for permission, Ryan moved back to the table where the small alien was now curled into a protective ball, its iridescent outer shell pulsing with bands of distressed yellow and sickly green. He placed a gloved hand gently on the shell. "It's okay, Krell," he said softly. "You're going to be all right." The university's quarantine barrier hummed to life, creating a transparent field between Ryan and Professor Zeth. From the observation area beyond, Ryan could see the alien students pressing against the glass, their varied anatomies creating a bizarre collage of eyes, sensory appendages, and expressions of shock. "The human is voluntarily exposing himself," came the translated voice of Trill, a tall, spindly Arcturian whose exoskeleton clicked with anxiety. "They truly do not value their biological integrity," responded Mez, a bulbous Ganmerian whose speech bubbled through the translation device. Professor Zeth's voice came through the intercom. "Reed, the medical team is en route. There's still time to exit through the personnel decontamination chamber." Ryan shook his head as he stroked the quivering shell of the young Vexillian. "Krell's ventral plates are showing signs of cascade syndrome. If I leave him alone, the stress could trigger a full systemic shutdown." Outside the quarantine field, the alien students watched with a mixture of horror and fascination as Ryan removed his protective gloves to better comfort the small alien. "Is he attempting to accelerate infection?" asked Vlox, a gelatinous student whose translator struggled with the concept of self-sacrifice. Ryan could hear their comments through the thin barrier, but he focused on Krell, whose shell was beginning to unwind slightly at the touch of his bare hand. "That's it," Ryan murmured. "You're not alone." The medical team arrived in full biohazard suits, led by Dr. Naya Ventura, the university's chief xenopathologist. She took one look at the scene and sighed. "Of course it would be you, Reed," she said through her suit speaker. "What's the situation?" "Vexillian cascade syndrome, early stages," Ryan reported, still gently stroking Krell's shell. "Respiratory ven expulsion followed by protective curling. His homeostasis indicators are erratic." Dr. Ventura approached cautiously, scanner in hand. "You've just exposed yourself to one of the most contagious interspecies pathogens known to the Alliance. The Vexillian immune response creates aerosol particles that can penetrate human mucous membranes." Ryan nodded. "I know. But he's just a kid. And he's scared." The gathered alien students murmured among themselves, their translators creating a cacophony of overlapping voices. "Humans truly are irrational," said Mex, the crystalline Solarian whose faceted body refracted light in patterns of confusion. "Not irrational," corrected Professor Zeth, whose species had the longest history of interaction with Earth. Humans have a different risk assessment algorithm when it comes to compassion. Inside the quarantine field, Dr. Ventura was preparing a stabilization chamber for Krell while Ryan continued to comfort the alien. The Vexillion had uncurled enough to expose one of its sensory stalks, which swiveled toward Ryan's face.
See?
The medical team is here, Ryan said softly. They're going to help you feel better. Krell emitted a series of clicks and whistles that the translator interpreted as, "You will become sick." Humans fear sickness more than death. This is what we learned. Ryan smiled. We fear a lot of things, but sometimes caring for others matters more than being afraid. Dr. Ventura approached with the stabilization chamber. Reed, we need to get him inside. And then you're heading straight to isolation for treatment. Ryan nodded and carefully lifted the now docile Vexillion. As he placed Krell in the chamber, the alien extended a delicate tendril that wrapped briefly around Ryan's wrist in what could only be interpreted as gratitude. Ready for transfer, Dr. Ventura announced, and the medical team activated the field extension to remove Krell safely from the lab. Ryan felt a tickle in his throat as he watched them go. When he coughed into his hand, there was a speck of green matching the fluid that had splashed his face shield earlier. Medical team, we have confirmation of transmission, Dr. Ventura said sharply. Prepare isolation room 1 for human physiology. Professor, ensure all students are scanned before release. The alien students watched as Ryan was escorted to a separate isolation chamber, many of them recording the event with various technological implants or devices. Is this normal human behavior? Asked Trill, antenna quivering. For some humans, yes, Professor Zeth replied, though most would consider Reed's actions unnecessarily risky. But they teach us that humans developed their civilization by avoiding disease, said Mez. Their historical texts emphasize quarantine, isolation, vaccination. Yes, agreed Professor Zeth, and yet they also built hospitals where healers deliberately exposed themselves to disease to care for others. Humans are
complex.
Inside the isolation chamber, Ryan lay on a medical bed as scanners assessed his condition.
Dr.
Ventura entered wearing a lighter version of the biohazard suit. Initial analysis shows the pathogen is already replicating in your respiratory system, she said, checking the readings. We've synthesized an adapted treatment based on the Vexillion protocols, but this is going to be unpleasant. Ryan nodded, wincing as another cough racked his body. How's Krell? Stabilizing. His guardian has been notified. Dr. Ventura gave him a stern look. You do realize you've just volunteered to be our first human case study of Vexillion cascade syndrome? Always happy to advance science, Ryan replied with a weak smile before doubling over with another cough. Dr. Ventura administered the first treatment through an inhalation mask. The xenobiology department is in an uproar. The alien students are demanding to observe your treatment as a unique educational opportunity. Ryan tried to laugh, but ended up coughing more green fluid into a collection basin. Great. I'm a lab specimen now. Professor Zeth is using this as a teaching moment about human psychological responses, she continued, adjusting the treatment parameters. Though, I think some of the students are more confused than enlightened. Outside in the observation area, the alien students had indeed gathered under Professor Zeth's supervision. Each species processed the event through their own cultural frameworks. The human's action violates basic self-preservation protocols, stated Vlox, rippling with perplexity. Yet it aligns with their historical concept of heroism, countered Mex, light refracting through his crystalline form in thoughtful patterns. Professor Zeth activated a holographic display showing Ryan's vital signs alongside information about human immune responses. This is an opportunity to understand a fundamental aspect of human psychology that differs from many of your species. Humans often make decisions based on emotional connections that override logical risk assessment. Is this a defect in their evolution? Asked Trill.
No, replied Professor Z.
It is possibly one of their greatest strengths. Their capacity for empathy across species boundaries has made them valuable members of the Galactic Alliance, despite their technological limitations. Inside the isolation chamber, Ryan's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The treatment Dr. Ventura had administered was fighting the pathogen but causing significant discomfort as his body reacted to both the disease and the cure. "Your temperature is rising," Dr. Ventura noted, applying a cooling patch to his forehead. "This is expected but concerning. The Vexillion pathogen wasn't designed for human physiology." Ryan nodded weakly, his skin flushed and sweaty. "How's Krell holding up?" "Better than you," she replied. "Vexillions have evolved alongside this pathogen. For them, it's similar to what humans would call a severe flu. For you." She glanced at the monitors. "Let's just say you're giving us valuable data on cross-species transmission." Through the observation window, Ryan could see the alien students watching him intently. Some were taking notes, others were engaged in animated discussions, and a few seemed genuinely concerned. "Your audience is quite engaged, Dr. Ventura said, following his gaze. "Glad to provide entertainment," Ryan gasped between labored breaths. Meanwhile, in the adjacent isolation room, Krell had fully emerged from his protective curl. His guardian, an older Vexillion named Dren, had arrived and was communicating with him through the isolation field. "The human who helped you is very ill," Dren told Krell, his translator conveying the concerned tone. "Because of me?" Krell's shell dimmed to a sorrowful blue. "Yes, but he knew the risk. Humans sometimes make such choices."
But why?
Krell's sensory stalks drooped. "In our educational materials, it says humans built their civilization by avoiding disease. They created quarantines and vaccines because they fear sickness more than anything." Dren's shell shifted in what translated as thoughtful contemplation. "That is true, but incomplete. Humans are contradictory beings. They fear disease, yet willingly face it to help others. This paradox is difficult for many species to comprehend." Professor Zeth, overhearing this conversation through the monitoring system, used it as a teaching moment for his students. This illustrates the danger of simplified cross-species cultural education. The statement, "humans fear disease," is accurate but lacks nuance. A more complete understanding would be that humans fear disease, yet often choose to overcome that fear when compassion demands it. The alien students process this information with various degrees of comprehension. For many, the concept of voluntarily risking infection was so alien to their evolutionary psychology that it seemed like madness. 3 days passed, and Ryan's condition worsened before it began to improve. The alien students established a rotation to observe his treatment, turning his isolation room into an impromptu classroom. Some species stayed only briefly, finding the display of human suffering disturbing, while others remained for hours, fascinated by the biological and psychological aspects of the case. On the 4th day, as Ryan was beginning to show signs of recovery, Professor Zeth brought Krell, now fully recovered and non-contagious, to visit through the isolation field. "Student Reed," the professor said, "Krell wished to communicate with you directly." The small Vexillion moved forward, his shell now glowing a healthy gold with ripples of grateful blue. "You risked yourself for me," Krell said through the translator. "Our educational modules did not prepare us for this behavior." Ryan, still weak but sitting up in bed, smiled. "Your educational modules probably say a lot of things about humans that aren't quite right. They say humans conquered disease through fear and avoidance," Krell continued. "That your species rose to prominence because you feared contamination and created elaborate systems to prevent it." "That's partially true," Ryan admitted. "We did fear disease, we still do. But we also built hospitals where people deliberately exposed themselves to sick patients. Throughout our history, there have always been those who chose to help despite the risk." Professor Zeth turned to his students. This apparent contradiction has been the subject of xenoanthropological debate for decades. The human capacity to override fear with compassion, even extending to non-human species, was one of the traits that most surprised the Galactic Alliance when Earth was first contacted.
Dr.
Ventura entered the isolation room with new test results. Good news, Reed. The pathogen levels are dropping, and your immune system is adapting remarkably well. We're documenting everything for the xenomedicine database. Ryan nodded gratefully, then turned back to Krell. How are you feeling? Fully recovered, Krell replied, his shell pulsing with healthy light. My guardian Dren says I was fortunate you were present when symptoms emerged. Your actions prevented a stress-induced systemic shutdown. One of the alien students, a serpentine draconid named Sis, slithered forward. I have attempted to understand this behavior through my species framework, but we have no equivalent. For draconids, exposing oneself to disease for a non-related individual would be considered mental dysfunction. For many species, altruism is family-bound, Professor Zeth explained. Humans extend it more broadly, even to other species. Is it a survival advantage? Asked Mez, bubbling curiously. For the individual? Often not, Professor Zeth replied. For the species as a whole? Perhaps. It has certainly made humans valuable allies in the Galactic Alliance. Ryan coughed weakly. I didn't exactly perform a cost-benefit analysis in the moment. Krell needed help, and I could provide it. This simple statement caused a flurry of discussion among the alien students, their various translators creating an overlapping chorus of contemplation and debate. By the end of the week, Ryan had recovered enough to be moved out of isolation, though he was still confined to the medical center for observation. The case had caused such interest that the Galactic University's xenopsychology department had launched a formal study on cross-species empathy, using Ryan's actions as a central case study. Professor Zeth brought several students to visit Ryan in his recovery room, where they found him sitting up in bed, reviewing lecture notes on his tablet. Student Reed, the professor greeted him, for arms performing the formal Zentari gesture of respect. How are you feeling today? Much better, Ryan replied. Dr. Ventura says I'll be back in class next week. Krell was among the visiting group, his shell now adorned with a student identification band. I have joined your xenobiology class, he announced. My guardian believes I have much to learn from humans. Ryan smiled. That's great, Krell. Just try not to spray respiratory fluid on anyone else, okay? The translator struggled momentarily with the humor, but Krell's shell flashed with amused pink ripples. I will contain my emissions. Mex, the crystalline Solarian, stepped forward. We have revised our educational materials on humans, he said, his faceted body gleaming under the medical center lights. The new entry states that humans fear disease, but value compassion more highly in certain circumstances. That's more accurate, Ryan agreed. Professor Zeth extended one of his forehands, presenting Ryan with a small device. The xenobiology department has created this for you. It contains the collected observations and reflections of all the students who observed your case. Many found their understanding of humans significantly altered. Ryan accepted the device with surprise. Thank you. I never intended to become a teaching moment. The most valuable lessons rarely arise from intention, Professor Zeth replied, inner eyelids blinking sagely. Dr. Ventura entered the room, reviewing Ryan's latest test results. You've made medical history, Reed. First documented human case of Vexillian cascade syndrome, and you've developed antibodies that we can synthesize for future treatments. The Xenomedicine Journal wants to publish the case study. Fame at last, Ryan joked weakly. Trill, the spindly Arcturian, stepped forward nervously. I have a question that may be inappropriate by human standards. Go ahead, Ryan encouraged. If you knew the potential consequences, would you make the same choice again? The room fell silent as everyone awaited Ryan's answer. He looked around at the assembled alien faces, some with eyes, some with sensory organs that bore no resemblance to human features, all watching him with curiosity. "Yes," he said simply. "I would." This caused another round of murmuring among the students, with various translators struggling to convey the complex reactions. "Even knowing the pain and danger?" Trill persisted. Ryan nodded. "Sometimes the right thing hurts." Professor Zeth used this moment to address his students. This is a key difference in human decision-making that many non-human species find difficult to model. They often willingly accept negative consequences for themselves if they believe it serves a greater good or helps another being. Krell moved closer to Ryan's bed. "My species has a concept that might be similar. We call it shell sharing, the willingness to extend one's protective shell around another at personal cost. Is this like your concept of compassion?" "That sounds very similar," Ryan agreed. "Though we don't have shells to share." "Yet you sheltered me with your presence when I was vulnerable," Krell replied, his shell glowing with grateful blue patterns. Dr. Ventura checked the time and addressed the group. "I need to run some final tests on my patient. You can continue your xenocultural exchange tomorrow." As the alien students filed out, led by Professor Zeth, Krell lingered behind. When the others had gone, he approached Ryan's bed again. "I have been researching human customs," he said hesitantly. "Is it appropriate to offer a thank-you gift for saving my life?" Ryan smiled. "It's not necessary, but it is a common human custom." Krell's shell brightened. "Good. I have prepared something." He extended a tendril, offering a small crystalline object. "This is a memory crystal for my homeworld. I have encoded my family's gratitude within it." Ryan accepted the gift carefully. "Thank you, Krell. That's very thoughtful. The crystal also contains access to my family's research archives," Krell added. "My parental unit is a leading expert on comparative xenobiology. They believe your immune response to the cascade syndrome may provide insights for their work." "I'm happy to help," Ryan said, examining the crystal with interest. After Krell departed, Dr. Ventura returned to complete her examination. "Your little act of compassion has far-reaching consequences," she commented as she checked his vital signs. "The Vexillian Science Academy has requested collaboration with Earth medical institutions based on your case. All from trying to help a scared kid," Ryan mused. "Sometimes the smallest actions create the biggest ripples," she replied, completing her scan. "By the way, Professor Zeth has requested permission to include your case in the core curriculum for all first-year xenobiology students." "As what?" "An example of human recklessness." Dr. Ventura smiled. "No, as a case study in how different species assess risk and value when compassion is involved. The Galactic University is particularly interested in understanding how humans balance self-preservation against altruistic impulses." 2 weeks later, Ryan returned to his regular classes. The incident had made him something of a celebrity at the Galactic University, with students from species he'd never even encountered before approaching him with questions about human psychology and ethics. The xenobiology lab had been thoroughly decontaminated, and a new safety protocol had been implemented, unofficially dubbed the Reed Protocol, which established procedures for compassionate care during potential contagion events. Professor Zeth welcomed Ryan back to class with a formal acknowledgement. "Student Reed's actions have provided us with new insights into human behavior and valuable medical data on cross-species pathogen transmission. His willingness to risk his health for another demonstrates a principle that, while alien to many of your cultures, is fundamental to understanding human society." The alien students regarded Ryan with a mixture of respect, curiosity, and lingering bewilderment. For many, his actions still defied their evolutionary logic, but they were beginning to understand that different species operated under different imperatives. After class, Krell approached Ryan in the university's central atrium, where students of all species gathered between lectures. The young Vexillian's shell was now adorned with additional academic markers, indicating he had been accepted into an advanced research program. "Your actions have changed perceptions beyond our university," Krell informed him. "The Galactic Council's Education Committee is revising its standard text on human behavior to include a section on compassionate risk-taking." Ryan laughed. "I'm not sure I deserve an entire section. Your case is not the only example, but it has provided valuable documentation," Krell replied. "My parental unit says that understanding this aspect of human psychology may be crucial for future collaborative efforts between our species." They were joined by several other alien students who had witnessed the incident, each bringing their own cultural perspective to the ongoing analysis of Ryan's behavior. "In my hive," said Zix, "a collective entity composed of thousands of tiny organisms functioning as one being, individual units sacrifice for the whole without hesitation. But they are genetically identical. You helped an entirely different species with no genetic imperative." "Humans aren't the only ones who show cross-species compassion," Ryan pointed out. "Many alliance species demonstrate similar behaviors. But few combine your level of disease avoidance technology with willingness to override it for compassionate reasons," Professor Zeth said, joining the conversation. This apparent contradiction fascinates xenopsychologists. The discussion continued as they walked toward the university's main plaza, where a new exhibition was being installed in the central hall, a holographic display titled "Compassion Across the Cosmos: Species Perspectives on Altruism." Ryan was surprised to see his medical scans and treatment footage included among the exhibits. "They could have asked permission," he muttered, seeing his feverish face projected 10 feet tall. "Your medical release forms included educational usage rights," Dr. Ventura reminded him, appearing at his side. "Besides, you're helping reshape interspecies understanding. That's worth a little embarrassment, isn't it?" Ryan had to admit she had a point. Around them, students from dozens of species were viewing the exhibition, engaged in animated discussions about the different ways compassion manifested across the galaxy. Krell gestured toward one display showing Ryan's first interaction with him during the crisis. "When I return to Vexilia, I will be giving presentations about this experience. Many in my species still believe that humans avoid all disease contact due to fear. Your actions provide an important counterexample. Just make sure they understand I'm not the standard for all humans," Ryan cautioned. "Plenty would have followed protocol and evacuated. Yet your literature and history celebrate those who take similar actions," noted Professor Zeth. "Your medical workers, emergency responders, and caregivers are consistently portrayed as exemplars of human virtue." The exhibition continued through the university's term break, attracting attention from beyond the campus. Representatives from the Galactic Alliance's Cultural Exchange Program visited to assess its potential for wider distribution throughout Alliance space. By the time the new term began, Ryan had fully recovered, though xenomedical researchers continued to monitor his immune response for long-term effects. The incident had led to his selection for a prestigious research position in the Xenomedical Ethics Department, where his perspective as both patient and caregiver offered unique insights. The final educational module developed from the incident was eventually distributed to all Alliance educational facilities, titled "Beyond Fear: Understanding Human Compassion in Contagion Contexts." It featured interviews with Ryan, medical data from his case, and comparative analyses of similar behaviors across species. For the alien students who had witnessed the event firsthand, it represented a fundamental shift in their understanding of humans. They had arrived with a common belief that humans whose history was marked by quarantines, vaccines, and elaborate disease prevention systems were primarily motivated by fear of contagion. They left with a more nuanced appreciation of how compassion could override that fear, even across species boundaries. Krell, who had continued his studies at the Galactic University, eventually became a leading researcher in comparative xenopsychology, with a special focus on compassion-driven behaviors. His first-hand experience with Ryan formed the foundation of his academic career. And Ryan, who had never intended to become a case study in human psychology, found himself regularly invited to speak at xenocultural conferences throughout the Alliance, explaining the seemingly contradictory human approach to disease and compassion. Yes, we fear disease, he would tell his diverse audiences. We built civilizations partly to protect ourselves from it. But we also built hospitals, where people deliberately exposed themselves to sickness to help others. Both instinct self-preservation and compassion are fundamental to understanding humans. This explanation rarely satisfied all species. Some continued to view human behavior as dangerously irrational, while others found it deeply admirable. But all agreed it was distinctly human, a complex blend of fear and courage, self-protection and self-sacrifice that defined humanity's place in the galactic community. Years later, when the Vexillian homeworld faced a devastating pandemic that threatened to overwhelm their medical systems, it was human medical teams armed with treatments developed partly from Ryan's case study who volunteered to assist, protected by protocols that balanced compassion with safety. And when the crisis passed, the Vexillian Council of Elders erected a memorial that included, among the names of those who had helped save their species, that of Ryan Reed, the human who had once risked his health for a scared Vexillian student, and in doing so, helped reshape interspecies understanding throughout the galaxy. The memorial's inscription, translated into all Alliance languages, read simply, "To those who fear disease, yet chose compassion, we offer our eternal gratitude." Ryan, visiting the memorial years after his student days had ended, stood silently before the inscription, remembering the frightened young alien who had sprayed contagion across his face shield. He had acted without calculation then, driven by the simple desire to comfort someone in distress. He could never have imagined how that moment would ripple outward, changing not just his life but interspecies relations throughout the Alliance. Beside him stood Krell, now a distinguished xenopsychologist, his shell bearing the intricate patterns of a mature Vexillian scholar. "Do you regret it?" Krell asked. Knowing all that followed, Ryan smiled and shook his head. Not for a moment. And in that answer lay a truth about humanity that the galaxy was still learning to understand, that sometimes the most human thing to do was to set aside fear in the name of compassion, even when logic argued otherwise. It wasn't always the safest choice, but it was one that had defined humanity's journey among the stars, earning them both bewilderment and respect from the myriad civilizations they had encountered. As they left the memorial, Ryan noticed a group of young alien students watching him with a curious intensity that suggested they knew who he was. One of them, a small draconid barely old enough for university studies, slithered forward hesitantly. "Are you the human from the educational module?" she asked, her translator giving her voice a musical quality. Ryan nodded. "That was a long time ago. Our professor says your actions were instinctive, not calculated," the young draconid continued. "Is that true?" "Mostly," Ryan admitted. "I just saw someone scared and in pain, and I wanted to help." The student's sensory crest rippled in a way that suggested deep contemplation. "My species is trying to understand this aspect of humanity. We do not naturally extend compassion beyond our genetic relations. Yet we recognize the value in your approach." "It's not always the right choice," Ryan cautioned. "Sometimes protocols exist for good reasons. Yet sometimes they must be reconsidered," Krell interjected. "The balance between caution and compassion is not fixed, but must be constantly reevaluated." The young students absorbed this wisdom, their various anatomies expressing thoughtfulness in species-specific ways. Before departing, the draconid student offered a formal gesture of respect that surprised Ryan with its sincerity. "Your story has changed how many of us see humans," she said simply. "Thank you for showing us that fear of disease and willingness to help are not mutually exclusive." As the students departed, Ryan realized that his simple act of compassion years ago had become something larger, a bridge between different evolutionary psychologies, a point of connection across the vast differences that separated species throughout the galaxy. It wasn't what he had intended, but perhaps it was what the Alliance had needed. A reminder that sometimes the most advanced response to suffering wasn't technological, but emotional, the willingness to reach out across boundaries of species, safety, and fear to offer comfort to another being in distress. And in that reminder lay hope for deeper understanding among the diverse civilizations that shared the galaxy, a understanding built not just on respect for differences, but on recognition of the compassion that could transcend them.